All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining eGroup's summer webinar series, where today we will be discussing how Zerto and cloud have changed the game around IT resilience. We're happy to be joined today by our speaker, Matt Ronchetti, eGroup's Senior Solutions Architect. Matt specializes in working with organizations to help define their hybrid cloud strategy and build and execute on a technology roadmap that works for them. Matt will be accompanied today by Greg Butler, Zerto's pre-sales engineer, who will be providing us with a demo on Zerto 7. Thank you for joining us, Greg. Before we get started, if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to ask them in the chat box. We'll be answering any and all questions at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, take it away, Matt.
Great, thanks. Well, again, my name's Matt Ronchetti, and been here at eGroup for about 6 months now, and I have a couple slides early on that talk a little bit about kind of my IT background and just how I've lived through some of this evolution. Outside of work, I am in the Charleston area, so love the beach and the sun, and I have four children, three of which are getting a little bit older, so I'm running around, you know, handling them on a day-to-day basis. But really, probably the best segue into DR is, you know, what allows me to get to sleep at night, right? So so a little background, if those of you don't know, let me kind of get through this. eGroup, we are an organization that's been around for almost 20 years now, and there we go. Founded in '99, 2 decades of kind of data center managed service and now private and public cloud optimization. So have really been leading the transformation both on premises data center optimization and now on in the cloud service industry. A couple of the accolades, I'll just throw this up here for you guys. One of the cool things, just in the last couple of weeks, we were that top one, Inc. Magazine's best companies to work for, I believe the only one in the South Carolina region. So pretty cool thing, and I can attest to that, again, being here for a number of months now, that I've really enjoyed getting to work with customers, and that starts with the people within eGroup. So again, how I got here. I've been in IT for about 20 years now, heavy in the data center space around 7. Came from the app kind of database side, and as data centers became more cloud focused, there was a real blurring, kind of the DevOps buzzword of kind of tearing down the walls of apps and databases and infrastructure guys, and really getting into the same rooms and building some of this stuff out. And so I cared about BCDR from an application perspective. I knew some of the terms and frameworks a little bit further along, but wanted my stuff to be up. Worked with infrastructure teams to see if I could help them out, and then took care of my stuff on my own when needed. I knew there was risks out there, but never quantified them. So again, as we get into terms, I don't know how familiar the audience is, but when you talk about recovery time objective, recovery point objective, RTO, RPO, I didn't know those terms, never really quantified what mine were. Knew that if we ever had a really big event, I'd be up late at night, and so would the team. But we weren't really doing a ton of things on to stack rank my applications, to do tabletop exercises as much as we wanted to, those types of things. But all said and done, we were able to reach a kind of an acceptable DR posture manually. This, again, we knew that we'd be feeding coffee to a lot of the team to get things back up and running, but we were there. We could check that box, and we knew we wanted to do more. The issue was doing more was going to just greatly increase the cost, and in terms of people and kind of technology. And as we got really complex, you just didn't know what to go after first. And so it's within that kind of model that the organization I was a part of, and everyone's organization, I feel like, are starting to get more globally diverse, which strains the network, which adds complexity, which starts to kind of have unintended consequences, and you just don't know all the relationships you have. And so what we saw was that the both that circular kind of icon I've got over there on the right and just scale was eating us alive. So what I mean by that is just the raw scale of our organization and the scale of the projects to support our backup infrastructure was just killing us. So we were able to back up, we were able to do the things we needed to do, but we understood the expense that it was causing the organization. And then how I got here on the redundancy side, very similar story. We set up an A side and a B side data center, kind of patted ourselves on the back, but this took a long time to implement. Again, you kind of think of that 5 to 7 year kind of window back. It was expensive on many levels, double the hardware, double the network, connectivity between the two, very manual to test. And honestly, we never really had 2x capacity for a real failover plan. So we could get some systems up, but we always knew that we'd be kind of cannibalizing the resources if we ever had an event. And this makes sense for organizations, that 2x capacity to buy insurance just seems like an investment that's really tough to convince a CFO if you're putting the priorities in front of them. From a technology standpoint, we use several different replication models: SAN-based replication, hypervisor-based, application-based, different network topologies, MPLS, point-to-points in between, site-to-site VPNs. We were definitely tuning this model to try to get it to work. All the replication engines either didn't work or they were expensive. That was one of the kind of epiphany moments as you were looking at some of the newer, slicker technologies. A lot of those folks came from legacy providers, and they kind of knew the soft spots and could really walk into my organization and say, I bet you're having these problems with operating, and it's spot on. And we've got some conversations and demos with Zerto today. I feel like they were definitely one of those providers that could come in and say, hey, you tired of the treadmill? Would you like to get off it? And we certainly were listening. Another thing about redundancy, so if you're not interfacing with your organization, you're kind of trying to hit a target with a blindfold on. We didn't really socialize those recovery objectives, and that really made it tough to get the investment. So again, once you have buy-in from your organization that yes, we really want 99.99% uptime, or we really want to be able to come back online in 15 minutes or an hour or whenever, you can really start to then tailor an investment strategy and a technology strategy. But again, as we were just building the A side, B side, we kind of went in, and the organization as a whole went in and said, well, IT's smart, they'll go ahead and figure these things out. And again, I've got some slides at the end of just, that's really not a great strategy to exceed expectations when you don't know what the expectations are going in. And so within this expense of operationalization and just the technology investments, this thing cloud started to apply pressure, right? So we're busy building the data center out, and the CFO or the CIO's on a flight, and they read a magazine and they go, hey, this is all super easy in the cloud. Why are we still investing? Some of that is again not accurate. I'll just say it, but the vision, I think, is so. You've really got to start to understand when you have these huge capital outlays of a data center, that you're going to be talking to CFOs and the C-suite in general that is looking at speed to business and some of those cloud first initiatives. So one of the things kind of I stop and talk about here is really the e-group model that is that cloud is an operational model, not a destination. And really what that means is, you know, if you boil it down, cloud is just another guy's data center at its most basic, and it's all about what they've done inside that cloud that makes it the special sauce. You know, we talk to organizations about private cloud. They can run their own cloud if they build those standards and make it scalable. There's no reason why you can't. But if you're really talking about what, you know, then why would I go with a Microsoft? Kind of their investment arm is something that you can leverage. They've already done it, and again, there's a global scale. So when you look at some of these bullets, you know, when you think of cloud, it's not just you know, any one thing, but it's all of these things. You know, you can invest in a private data center and get many of these. But again, is that where you want to spend your time? Do you have the team? Do you have the talent? Is that, you know, what you want to be your special sauce? So, you know, what I think about cloud, it really starts with that first bullet. There are standards, it's scalable, and to do that, you really need to be simple. So I don't know if it's the standards that make it simple or the you know, the simple that just breeds standards, but you really got to think about that in anything you do. Even if you guys are running something on premise, that you start to talk about configuration versus customization. If everything's a special snowflake, that makes things like BCDR very, very difficult. If I'm physical, that makes it difficult. I've got to have the very same model, you know, at times in a B-side data center. And so really thinking about those things to pull out some of those complexities makes everything easier, including your DR strategy. Cloud, again, the special sauce on top of all that hardware, which many times now is just commodity, is that software. Very open to integration. So the software is open and I can connect to it. And really what this does is it starts to democratize IT. Anyone can do this. I can get a developer that spins up a server in minutes, which is great. But remember, it's setting that expectation now for your user base that if you take any longer than that, they're going to start to ask why I'm not just doing this in cloud. So you've really got to work with your end users to let them know that, like, yes, you want them to be fast, you want to allow self-service, but you also have to do it within a governance structure. And that's what I think IT can do best from kind of a center seat at the table. And then really what cloud does is then provide speed to market. You can build on top of it, to scale up or scale down, and honestly to failure. And why I leave that in there is, you know, I've made investments in my career that didn't pan out, and it took 8 months to get the thing installed, to get you know, to get it configured, to start to work through the bugs, to start to feel like you're at a run rate, to realize this really isn't what we want to do long term. And at that point, how much time, kind of, you know, blood and treasure have you invested in that? So I really like the ability for, you know, the development community and the infrastructure community to spin something up and to tear it down pretty easily. And so again, you know, if you're ready to re-platform, public clouds are there. If you're looking to kind of stay in the platform as it stands today, you know, you can talk about virtualization or some of the things that are coming out. But again, it really starts with just that ability to be scalable. And so how does the cloud benefit kind of IT resilience? So again, you know, we talked simplicity on the last slide. This just kind of breaks it down. I've taken part in POC engagements around all three of these providers, Zerto, Rubrik, ASR, and a host of others, you know, in the storage space, for example. And those POCs are what they say they are. You know, they spin up easily. You kind of see what they are. They leverage a standardization now that we didn't have years ago, where, you know, every OS was a little different, every server a little different, and you couldn't run a POC. But now it's very simple to go from, you know, I like the way the demo looks in Zerto, to having a working POC in kind of days, not weeks or months. Like I said, they walk in and they know the legacy players, and they can kind of address those needs with some of the cloud first options. They're going to assume hybrid cloud, so these aren't just even a Microsoft product assumes that they're going to be trying to they're in their best interest to try to lift and shift you out of that data center, but everyone's assuming that you've got 2 data centers, and one of them could be physical. And again, bottom line is that they're fast, they just work. And that's a great thing to know, that these are software based, and they're going to work right out of the box. And the one thing, I've got a little image of the chaos monkey. If you've ever kind of Googled that, we're not talking about natural disasters or, I'm in Charleston, the big hurricane coming where you've got days to plan. We're talking about a guy that trips over a cord or puts in the wrong command line, entry, and you could have something on the, in front of you really quickly. So when you think about tabletopping exercises, don't just do that there was a fire or there was a hurricane or tornado. Be thinking about some of the smaller things, and that's where that resilience can help out. So I've got a couple screenshots here just on the, hey, it's simple. If you've got a server in Azure, you're literally talking about hitting this left nav for backup, hitting enable backup, and getting that backup stood up in a matter of minutes. Every server you spin up in Azure has kind of an agent that is able to do things like that. So really just, again, thinking about when I get those things up, everything just gets a little bit easier. So I feel like, organizations like Zerto have really kind of understand the expectation about, hey, I just want that easy button, and are leveraging some of that stuff in their products. Again, when we talk about speed here, I've got a little bit of a link that you guys can see, but you're talking about going from the Azure pricing calculator to understanding, what a server might cost, to spin up in a matter of minutes. Very standard, so I can kind of replicate that, and even talk about, ARM templates to start to automate spin up of larger environments. And I've actually got a screenshot here a little further down that for Zerto specifically, but pretty much anything is in the marketplace in Azure. So you can get some really complex things just by kind of a couple of right clicks. When you talk simplicity, kind of my kind of Azure site recovery screenshot here of just saying, hey, I'd like to protect these, or I'd like to migrate them over. In this model, we've got physical servers. Have you done deployment planning? I have. What is your config server? My target's Azure. I've got replication settings that would set up things like your RTO and your RPO, and you're up and running. So again, when you're thinking about a POC with any of these providers, pretty simple to do. If you're in a VMware environment, they'll even provide OVAs. But if you're physical, you've got the executable bits there to spin yourself up a config server. And when you think about Zerto, I feel like you get that simplicity and you get the speed. So just showing you a little bit of the site-to-site VM level replication architecture here. If you're thinking about cloud, it's literally as easy as creating a resource, opening up the marketplace, asking for, I'd like a Zerto virtual replication server, a ZCA as they call it, cloud appliance. It spins up. You can connect it to your existing Zerto infrastructure pretty easily, a couple ports, making sure those are open, and you're up and running. And one of the nice things about Zerto is, the ability to create a tertiary link. So again, if you have a DR plan, you're not going to be able to tear that down to start kind of your next kind of cloud migration strategy or replication strategy. With Zerto, you can create that third link, keep your A side and B side physical sites while testing out how Zerto might work for you in the Microsoft world. So again, talked a little bit about Innovation Engine. This is certainly not an all-inclusive list, but if you're looking for cloud and kind of understanding what it might be able to bring, again, all of these things can probably done in some shape or form in a physical data center that you guys kind of manage and build out. But being able to hitch your wagon to an Azure and say, I'd like to use your virtual network gateways. I'd like to use your Flash, your policy, your blueprints, your UI. Again, some of the things around self-service that are just built in. I just really feel like if you start to look at all of these things, some of these are certainly softer costs, but there is a story here where getting those moved over can really start to add some ancillary benefits. So with that, I want to flip it over to Greg to kind of talk a little bit about the new release of Zerto and kind of what that changes, and then talk about the demo environment that he's got spun up, kind of show you the environment, show you some of the latest and greatest of 7.0, and then we'll throw it back for a couple things at the end of this that talks a little bit about what can you guys do from a BCDR perspective that takes no investment at all, and honestly that a Zerto product or any product that you're looking at is going to need as you kind of stand it up anyway. So just some of those, how do you take care of your environment and leverage a Zerto to its fullest? With that, I will hand it over to Greg.
Great, thanks Matt, I appreciate it. Give me just 1 second here and I will show out my screen. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
So it's kind of in presentation mode, Greg. You might need to just switch it to the full screen.
How about
there
now?
you go. Yep, perfect.
Great, thanks. So as Matt mentioned, my name is Greg Butler. I'm a pre-sales engineer with Zerto. I've been with them about 6 months. I came from the managed service space at Rackspace, designing both private, public, and hybrid clouds. And much like Matt, I've been in the IT space for almost 20 years as well. And I came to Zerto really because I got exposure to it while at Rackspace, and really just found that the product did what it was designed to do, and what the creators wanted it to do. It actually works, unlike a lot of our competition. So what I want to do is just give you a kind of a high level nuts and bolts. It's just a couple slides, and then we'll jump in to the demo and actually take a look at the product. So first off, Zerto is built as an IT resilience platform. So you can think of that as a next generation BCDR product. We were founded on hypervisor-based continuous replication. So what that means is that we're abstracted away from the compute and storage layers and even the hypervisor layers. So we can replicate between, say in a private cloud environment, between VMware to VMware or VMware to Hyper-V. We can replicate between different storage platforms, EMC to NetApp, et cetera. And then we can also replicate from any of those types of environments up to public cloud. Because it is continuous block level replication, our RPOs are not in a day or even hours or minutes, they're in seconds. So just a little bit of anecdotal evidence there. One of our larger customers is Blue Cross Blue Shield. They're protecting over 6,000 virtual machines in their environment with an RPO of 7 seconds across the entire enterprise. And Zerto gives you with that protection what's called application consistency groupings. And we'll take a look at that in the demo, but essentially the virtual machines are placed into logical groups that you want to protect together for the purposes of restoring them together. So what that means is they're usually grouped by application. And when you go to recover those VMs, every single VM in that virtual protection group is restored and recovered to the exact same point in time. So this is a big departure from traditional backup programs where your backups are typically done sequentially. You know, your database might be done at midnight, middleware at 3 a.m., web server at 4 a.m. So when you go to restore, they're not necessarily consistent. We are replicating to a journal at the target site. So that journal is what gives you those very low RPOs and also a very, very granular ability to restore. And we'll show you that in the demo. You'll have in excess typically of 1,200 restoration checkpoints in a single day. And much like our very low RPO, which is in seconds, RTO is in minutes. You know, it depends on the size of the environment, obviously, and how transactional they are and what the performance of the hardware is. But most of our customers can certainly recover applications in minutes and oftentimes an entire data center in under an hour. So that's Zerto overall. The company's been around since 2009, and like I mentioned, started out as continuous replication. And our customers love the product so much that they came to us and said, you know, is there any way that we can use Zerto to replace our other backup products? And Zerto 7, which came out about 6 weeks ago, has a number of improvements. Improvements around public cloud performance that we'll get into in the demo. One of the key features is the ability to actually perform long-term retention. So you can actually utilize Zerto as a single pane of glass for not only workload protection between clouds, but also the ability to check that compliance checkbox and use it for backup. So Zerto 7 wraps everything up, gives you the disaster recovery, continuous replication, backup, hybrid cloud and multi-cloud ability. Excellent use case is for migration, either between private clouds or from private cloud up to public cloud. Like Matt mentioned, you have the ability to send workloads up to public cloud while still protecting on-prem workloads without interruption. So you can test very easily in public cloud. And, you know, key to any product like this is orchestration. I don't care, you know, how easily or how quickly you get your data from one place to another. If you can't push a button and instantiate it and use it in some sort of meaningful fashion in a reasonable amount of time, it's not a DR plan. It's really of no use to you. So we'll take a look at the orchestration capabilities in Zerto 7. And sort of topping all of this off is an analytics portal where you can take a look at your different sites, be they private cloud, public cloud sites, a mixture of the two, and see the replication points, the SLAs are being met, etc. Bear with me 1 second, and I'm going to hop over to my dashboard. Before I jump into the demo, does anybody have any questions so far?
We don't have any questions. I think they're all muted though, Greg.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Okay, so you're looking at the Zerto 7 dashboard here. This is, you know, what I call the coffee cup screen. Come in with your cup of coffee, make sure all the lights are green, there are no errors in the morning. There are two components to Zerto. What we're looking at here is called the ZVM, or the Zerto Virtual Manager. That's your GUI. It's also your orchestrator. It hooks into your hypervisor, either VMware or Hyper-V, and performs the orchestration capabilities. The other component is what's called a virtual replication appliance, and those are simple, small hardened Debian Linux appliances that get deployed to the hosts that are in the hypervisor cluster. Installation of Zerto is very, very simple. Matt had mentioned that he liked Zerto because you can do a proof of concept sometimes in days as opposed to weeks or months. We actually, I think, broke a record about a month ago. We had a customer come to us that was desperately in need of standing up a proof of concept and was meeting with his CIO the next day. We actually got Zerto up and installed, configured, replicating between sites with 2 VMs, and actually did a failover test in under 90 minutes. The product can be installed really, honestly, if you have your ducks in a row, in about 20 minutes. So I want to talk for a minute about what I touched on before. Zerto's ability to protect VMs is based on the virtual protection group. So this is a logical grouping of your virtual machines, usually based on application. You can see here I've got 5 different virtual protection groups, and they are being replicated to these different sites. You'll notice Zerto is bidirectional. We don't really have a concept of a primary or secondary site. You can replicate workloads from your primary site to secondary, or from secondary back to primary. I have connections here from my San Diego site that I'm currently logged into to Boston, which is my other private cloud site. It's a VMware-based site. And then I have connections up to AWS and Azure. So you can see this virtual protection group is actually replicating from Boston back here to San Diego. In addition to replicating to a remote geographic site, you can also do local protection. You can see this icon here that's doing a U-turn. I'm protecting locally from San Diego to San Diego. You can do that if you have any sort of workloads that you need to have at the primary site for nearline restoration. So what I'll do now, just to show the capabilities, configuration options inside of Zerto, I'll create a test virtual protection group. The name can be whatever you'd like it to be. Priority is just a simple QoS mechanism. If you had a higher priority application, you could give it a high priority, and those rights would be given priority to be sent over the WAN to the target site. On the next screen, I'm given a list of servers that are not currently being protected, so I can choose one of those. But in addition, as Matt mentioned, you have the one-to-many capability. So if I come down here to this section, I can see virtual machines that are currently being protected in another VPG. I could also choose them to be protected in this VPG. So in the use case I mentioned before, if you're protecting between 2 private cloud sites but want to test moving some of that up into Azure, you could select those VMs, send them up to Azure for testing using that method. On the next page, I choose my recovery site. So I can choose either local, Boston, my remote private cloud site, or one of the public clouds. So I'll go ahead and choose Azure here. I then define my retention period. So Zerto will keep that journal-based recovery, that continuous replication, from anywhere from 1 hour up to 30 days. Target RPO is just to get an alert and an email if the RPO exceeds a certain amount of time. Zerto is going to protect the virtual machine as quickly as it can, so you don't actually set a target RPO. but most customers see RPOs between 5 and 15 seconds. So if you had a 15-second RPO, you might want to say, okay, if it goes up to a minute, give me an alert. On the next screen here, it shows the volumes that we're going to be protecting for the server that I chose. You do have the ability, if there's any sort of a temp DB volume or paging file, swap disk, any sort of data that's ephemeral. If you choose temp data, we'll replicate it the first time just to have it for recovery purposes, but we'll ignore the subsequent IO so that you're not sending unnecessary data over the WAN. Now here's where we get into the nuts and bolts of the Azure configuration. So what we're looking at here is the different options that I have in my Azure subscription, okay? So when you configure Zerto to replicate to Azure, what you're installing up in the Azure cloud is what's called our ZCA, or Zerto Cloud Appliance. That's the only virtual machine that has to run. All of the data that is replicated up into Azure goes to blob storage. So this is great because unlike some other products, you're not paying to have those virtual machines powered on 24/7. You just have the ZCA that's receiving the data and writing it to blob storage. So the account that you used to install that ZCA up in Azure, we are seeing everything that account has access to here. This gets dynamically updated, I believe, every 10 minutes. So we can see our Azure VNets that are available, the subnets that we can fail over to, network security groups, etc. So we have two different columns here, and this is where you start to see some of the Zerto orchestration capabilities. So when you go to do a failover test, you're probably going to want to have that virtual machine in an isolated bubble network, not routable back to production, right? So here you can choose which VNet in a failover test scenario and which subnet you would like those virtual machines to be spun up in. Our column over here, which is failover and move recovery, that's for a live operation. So if you're actually in a DR scenario and need to fail the machines over to Azure, these are the settings that these virtual machines would use. So that's it. That is all that's involved in creating a virtual protection group for Azure. I'm not going to create this one, but if I were, it would simply begin the initial replication of the disks up into Azure, and once the initial sync was done, would continue protecting with continuous data protection. So what I'll do, actually, because we already have a virtual protection group configured that is going to Azure, let's do a test failover so you can actually see the product in action. So if I click the test button at the bottom left-hand corner, you can see I can choose from which of my VPGs I would like to fail over. You can choose an entire data center. You can choose an individual virtual protection group. I'm going to choose this one here that is going to Azure. On the next screen, I have the ability to choose a checkpoint. So this is where you really see the power of that journal-based continuous replication. You know, if I was in a real disaster scenario, I would probably choose my latest checkpoint. But in the case of, say, a failed patch, a bad code release, ransomware, I'm probably going to want to roll back in time. So if I look and scroll down, let's say, my company was hit with ransomware at 11:39 a.m. I could choose a checkpoint of 11:38 and 55 seconds and roll back to 5 seconds before the ransomware hit. For our purposes, I'm just going to choose the latest checkpoint here. And click Start Failover Test. So what's happening right now, Zerto is connecting up to the Zerto Cloud appliance in the Azure Cloud, and it's going to instantiate the virtual machine based on the settings that we set in the VPG, like we walked through before. So the VNet, the subnet, the virtual machine type, and it's going to take the virtual machine's disks that are in, blob storage, which is very cheap, and it's going to convert it and attach it to the virtual machine and spin up that VM. Okay, so what you're looking at now is my Azure portal, and I just did a search for the word file. The name of the server is file-server. So you can see that this has already been instantiated on the Azure side, is in the status of creating. Zerto always appends a dash testing recovery to the name of the file. It just lets any admins that are logged in to either the public or private cloud, target site, let them know that this is a purposeful action. This VM is supposed to be running there. Please don't stop it or delete it. So we'll give that a few minutes to instantiate and spin up. While that is running, I want to talk about one of the other features of Zerto 7, and that is the long-term retention that I mentioned before. So Zerto replicates in a private cloud environment to whatever target data store you wish it to on the DR side. That's great for your short-term 30-day journal-based retention, but beyond that, you're going to want to store that data on storage that's cheap and deep, some sort of tertiary target. So that's where long-term retention comes in. If I come to setup here, click on repositories, you can see here I have two repositories identified for long-term retention. And I'll just take a look at the new repository configuration. You can offload data to these tertiary storage devices. Really, any NFS or SMB share. We have pre-tuned Zerto out of the box for a few different purpose-built backup appliances, shown here: HPE Store Once Exagrid and Dell EMC Data Domain. But you can also choose other dedupe appliance or just network share. So what happens with long-term retention? You set up a backup schedule, much like any other backup product, grandfather, father, son scenario. And what it's doing is it's taking the journal checkpoints and offloading them to that tertiary storage for as long as you wish. We've change long-term retention so that it has an indefinite time span. And one thing important to note that's coming in Zerto 7.5 in September is you're going to have the ability to target long-term retention directly to object storage in public cloud. So you'll be able to write to Amazon S3 and Microsoft Blob Storage for that long-term retention. So one of the enhancements, hopping back to Azure regarding public cloud in version 7, you know, we're sort of beholden in public cloud to the limitations inherent to public cloud, right? In private cloud, we have access to the underlying storage, to the hypervisors, the underlying infrastructure. You don't have that in public cloud. So all of our work in Azure and AWS is done through API. And what we've been able to do in version 7 with Azure is actually utilize what's called Azure scale sets. So the Zerto Cloud Appliance is able to deploy a set of worker nodes to do the conversion of that virtual machine and create that VM instance up in the Azure cloud. And what that means is that we're getting near private cloud speeds as far as instantiation of those virtual machines. So let me hop back over to my portal here. So we can see the file server -testing recovery is now running. So Zerto orchestrated the conversion of that virtual machine from blob storage, created the instance, attached the disk, and powered the VM on.
And Greg, not to get too deep into the orchestration capabilities, but I think it's important because I think it's a differentiator for Zerto. But did this have to re-IP anything, or did it, you know, attach to DNS, or those things that could have happened but didn't?
So let's take a look at the console here. So I chose this 10.173.0 subnet. So in Azure and AWS, obviously the VMs come up with DHCP. So it was assigned this private IP. As far as DNS changes, Zerto does have the capability to run pre and post recovery scripts. So just as an example, a pre-recovery script might be, all right, I'm going to fail over a database. Let me run a script against my database before I do that. Post-recovery script might be orchestrating any external DNS changes that might need to be done. So yes, thank you for bringing that up. You do have the flexibility there to run scripts, and those are simply PowerShell scripts that run on the Zerto virtual machine, which is a Windows-based machine. So if I come back to my console here, go back to VPGs. You can see here my Azure VPG has this button. I can click Stop Failover Test. And I get to choose whether or not I thought this was a success or a failure. and this is relevant for a reporting feature that I'll show you in just a second. You can put notes in that field, and we're going to click stop. Zerto is going to automate the shutdown of that virtual machine in Azure and remove it. So it does the cleanup orchestration as well. What I'll show you here is after you perform a failover test, this is a great feature for compliance. Let's see, our test is still in the process of being cleaned up in Azure, so I will show you a previous test. And you can see the running task up here. It's still stopping the failover. But what that's going to give us afterwards is this recovery report. Bear with me for 1 second. I think I'm having a webinar related issue.
And we're bumping up against the 12 o'clock window as well, Greg.
Okay.
So
yep. Definitely, this is the last piece that I'll show you. So here is the recovery report that Zerto generates for you. It shows you the start and stop time of the test and all of the actions that were taken on each virtual machine. This is a great compliance checkbox to prove that you are actually doing your DR tests. You can sign, date them, hand it off to your CIO or your external auditing agency. So that is it. Ran a few minutes over, apologize for that.
No worries. So thanks, Greg. Like I promised, just a couple things that to think about as you leave here. And one of the big ones I wanted to discuss was just the 5 things you can do today around your DR space that cost nothing. Obviously your time, but I would just say start to write down all your services, not so much your servers, but what I mean by that is, do you provide email? Do you provide, messaging, if you wanted to call it that, an ERP or a CRM? What is specific to your business? And then organize those into BCDR tiers. I like to say here, including tier 0. Again, you can't bring up a database if there's no network. So just be thinking about what order of operations looks like there. And then I say guesstimate RTO and RPO. Again, this is early on. What do you think it would be? What do you think it should be? And we'll talk a little bit at the bottom of the slide about kind of then what's. Complete those tabletop exercises for tier 1. Again, starting small. Can I fail over a machine? If not, I might need a technology like Zerto. Implement that, fail fast, try to get that to where you feel good, and then start to expand across your organization. What I say here is while you're failing fast, you gain directional insight, but don't extrapolate too far. Many of the snags you guys are going to hit are going to come only from tabletop exercises. You really do have to try to execute this, and that's where that Zerto kind of test failover button comes in to actually get that into an encapsulated bubble, sure, but I can actually see that it came over. I can actually see that maybe the IP address needs to be a certain something, or I need to make sure that the applications upstream and downstream are aware of that. Those are the types of things that you're not going to catch unless you actually start doing these exercises. And then I mentioned guesstimate initially, but start to socialize those with your business leadership. You know, I think that's a great way to figure out, is IT meeting their expectations? They might be assuming that you guys are doing better than you are, and you're going to have a conversation with them about to get the RPOs and RTOs you want. We might have to make a purchase. You know, to get 2x capacity or to move to cloud, you might have to have that in your run rate. So just make sure that they're aware of the state of the world, no matter where it is. And I think you can have some good conversations then about how to impact change. So again, as you're doing those things, now you can start to talk about where I want to invest. A CMDB, again, knowing what you have running and what you need backed up and replicated, you know, is an area where that investment, you know, whatever level you guys choose, needs to be thought of. Then you start to talk about the actual backup and replication platforms. But again, if you don't know what needs to be backed up and what you're running, there's almost no point. It does need to be a little bit of an orderly process. But then you start to get into automation platforms. Again, we talked about orchestration with Zerto. You might have complex scenarios where you really got to think about, maybe I'm going to spin up net new, or I'm going to use Zerto to orchestrate a kind of planned failover. When you think about offsite facilities, where am I going to fail over to? Is that going to be my B-side data center, my DR facility, or is that going to be public cloud? Can that be 5 miles down the road because of network? Can it be 500 miles? Again, you'd like it to be further, but how do your applications handle that latency? And then think about architectural enhancements as well. Again, if you're running, say, physical hardware, it's going to be more of a challenge. If you're running, you know, a single server versus 2 servers. So if you wanted to go platform as a service, or even SaaS for a certain service, that would be kind of in that realm of, I'm going to change architecturally and really enhance my BCDR strategy that way. And coupled with that, you know, I've thrown this slide up for others. Again, you know, I'm partial to cloud and Azure specifically, but where do you want to run long term? What's best for you? What do you want to take care of? What is your special sauce? As you look at this and you move from left to right on your screen, when you have a server that you need to take care of on premises, you're taking care of the whole stack. As you move to infrastructure, you start to abstract those areas. And as you get to software as a service, they give you a login and you go about your business. And you really only have to take care of the you know, the customization or what makes you guys special on top of that software as a service. So this type of slide about what do I want to take care of long term starts to impact all things. How big is your team? You know, how much are you going to invest in technology or data centers, people, training? Are you going to change those things? So be thinking about this and kind of where your organization fits long term, and it can help you with things like BCDR, but also about org design. And with that, I believe we get to the question portion. I did see one, and Carly, if you've got other ones, you can certainly pull it up. But one of the questions, and Greg, maybe you can answer this, but Zerto support for the Nutanix stack, AHV or any of those things, do you guys have that today? And is that something that's on your roadmap?
We do not have it currently. Don't hold me to it, but the last that I've heard is that AHV support will be coming out in version 8, which should be April of next year.
All right. And then were there any other questions?
Yes, Matt, it looks like one other question came in. Is there a best scenario to use Zerto and a best time to use ASR?
Sure, so I can take that one. I really feel like Zerto, from an orchestration standpoint, from a fire and forget, from a UI perspective, really sets itself apart from ASR. Just the ability to kind of script those things out and see that they work. I would say that anything kind of go forward, ASR is a pretty good tool, especially in the physical space, to get from kind of here to there with a server or a handful of servers. When you start to get into continuous replication or kind of the advanced use cases, that's where I would start to lean into a Zerto to not just move over one time or move a single server over, but to start to talk about maintaining that uptime. I think you saw a little bit of Greg's kind of demo on the compliance aspect. ASR doesn't have really anything like that. So if you want to be able to just hand that piece of paper that's generated to say we were able to do a failover, that's another great benefit from the Zerto stack. So. All right, and with that, I think we've run out of our time. Certainly appreciate it, you allowing us to go long. We will post this out there, the recording. If there's any additional questions you guys have, again, feel free to contact eGroup and we can get in touch with Zerto if there's things we need to on that front. Carly, do you want to wrap it up or?
Absolutely. Thank you guys, everybody, for hanging on a couple minutes late. We really appreciate you joining us today and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.